Is the Earth in hot water? Worries over a sudden rise in ocean temperatures has scientists searching for answers. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu and this is The Heat. According to the University of Maine, last month the global ocean surface temperature hit a new record high. The rise has sparked questions about its cause, and concerns over whether it may lead to a surge in atmospheric warming. We begin with this report from Edith Tiansen.
Our ocean temperatures have been going up since late 1800s, with a substantial warming taking place over the last 3 decades. But the most recent spike in sea surface temperatures since last year has taken everyone by surprise.
There's a bit of uncertainty in the field about exactly where all that heating is coming from, the interior of the ocean or something early on in the transition to an El Nino. There's a few different theories, but it's shocking the amount of heat that's built up in the surface ocean. It's unprecedented.
Data from the University of Maine's Climate Change Institute shows the consistent rise in sea surface temperatures around the world since the 1980s. But the difference between last year and this year is more drastic than any other annual change. Many scientists agree El Nino is partly to blame, a weather system that heats the ocean.
The state of the ocean is warming, and we are currently in a so-called neutral phase of the El Nino oscillation, whereby basically we left the state of the La Nina and we are moving toward a different state.
But many are questioning whether El Nino alone can explain the record jump in surface temperatures when oceans are already acting as a buffer, absorbing nearly 90% of the heat from global warming.
But when we're starting from a baseline where the ocean is already this warm, it is a little frightening to think where we're going to be at this time next year if it follows that natural pattern of heating. Then it's going to have all kinds of impacts on accelerating global change, melting ice. The water expands when it heats. That means that sea level rise is going to speed up.
And that's also bad news for marine life and people whose livelihoods depend on it.
A large fraction of our population lives off the productivity of our coastal systems, our oceans. And so as these things, as coral reefs, as these things start to crumble, we're seeing more and more people food stressed, job-wise, ecotourism and stuff stressed that people aren't coming to these countries as much because the reefs don't look as pretty and that type of stuff.
Oceans have been our ally in containing the impact of global warming, and their rapid warming could be an indicator for catastrophic consequences of climate change arriving earlier than expected. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Changhua Wu is CEO of the Beijing Future Innovation Center. Michael K. Dorsey is Director of Arizona State University's Sustainability Solutions Service and a Chair Professor at ASU's College of Global Futures. Also with us is Yixing Xu. He served as Research Director at Breakthrough Energy Sciences. And my colleague, Sean Callebs, has provided extensive coverage of the global climate crisis. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Sean, let me start with you. Great to have you with us in the studio. Let's talk about that report that tells us that ocean water surface temperatures have risen very rapidly from early March to the end of April. Shocking, as we heard someone say in that report, much hotter and at record levels. How will this impact marine life?
It's great to be here on it, and I've actually, I guess, been on the front lines of covering climate change for the last 30 years. I've seen so much going from Greenland down to the Amazon basin and the Arctic. Let's talk about that specifically, what a 1 degree rise in temperature could do. Well, firstly, it would be devastating to coral populations, which are so important. basically house about 25% of all of marine life. So you talk about all the fish that need to live and spawn, live healthy in there, and as we heard in the report, contribute to the fisheries. Secondly, fish populations are also dramatically affected by just that small rise in temperature. When their digestive systems, the enzymes are less efficient, therefore they're not nearly as reproductive as they would have been in the past. And these fisheries are also moving. So we've heard so much about overfishing in the ocean with those giant trawlers out there. Well, if fish populations migrate to different areas, it's going to be more and more difficult not only to catch those fish, but to find fish. The populations will diminish severely, and all the various wildlife that feeds off those fishes, whether it be whale or stellar sea lions, things of that nature, the pollock fisheries up in the Arctic area have been adversely affected over the last 10 to 15 years. So it's really surprising to see the ocean temperature jump by just this 1 degree or so rise over a period of years. And if you talk to people, they say, oh, it doesn't sound as much. No, this is the kind of thing that could be catastrophic, also leading to sea level rise, and that's a whole nother issue. But it's a mess.
Yeah, we will talk about that in a moment, sea level rise. But Sean, one other thing. So this rise of 1 degree, this is going to affect all species in all parts of the world.
Absolutely, and some are going to be hit a lot harder. As I mentioned, those that depend on coral reefs, because if those reefs start bleaching and dying, that is going to be a huge population. We spent some time up in Greenland covering the ice sheet up there, and one thing we found out, the fish populations are moving. More warm weather fish were moving off the shore there, and they have more than 1 million seal up in that area that need these fish species to survive. And there we're looking at the Arctic, way up in the top of Alaska, and up there as well. I mean, just tremendous. The ice is getting so much thinner. The indigenous people that make their living, their history, their culture going out doing whaling, they can't go out on this ice. The water is absorbing more CO2, and that's making it even more difficult for animals to breed and live in the area. So this is something that our leaders really need to focus and hone in on. This needs attention.
Changhua, there are some researchers who are linking this jump in ocean surface water temperatures to El Nino. That's the climate pattern that we see 2 to 7 years in a cycle when we see ocean surface water temperatures rise in the eastern Pacific. In fact, we've seen water temperatures rising off the coasts of Ecuador as well as Peru. Is that the likely scenario here?
I think so. I think even though there's still a lot of scientific uncertainty, questions the scientists need to address further, but we all know that we already removed the lid of the giant climate Pandora box there. All the scientific studies actually pointing to the sea level rises, melting of glaciers, the warming, damage to the crops, infrastructure, you name it, actually, we are already in it. The question today is more like, okay, how much more catastrophic it's going to get actually next? How much will be prepared actually for that? So, we now have more than ever equipped with the scientific knowledge and the information, even though there's uncertainties there, we sort of see this globe under this lens of global climate change there. We spotted actually different regions having different reactions there, but at the end of the day, we all know the planet is a system. Every part of the planet, particularly in the ocean, 71% of the Earth is covered by ocean there. All the system and in systems, above systems, among systems actually, they are very much connected there. We need to decode the connectivity there. In the meantime, trying to figure out actually how we can better prepare to respond. We use the term about adaptation, and the resilience there, and how much the governments, the global community needs to invest in resilience, and so that will be able to prevent, hopefully actually to reduce the damage in the meantime to protect what we have today and for the future.
Michael Dorsey, scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration tell us that there are marine heat waves that are sweeping the ocean floor around North America. This has led to they're more intense and they last longer. What effect will this have in our climate? In fact, that's what led the AP to say, or rather pose the question, is the Earth in hot water?
Anna, thank you so much. To some of your listeners, a 1 degree or even a 2 degree rise in sea temperature may seem small, but that small rise is actually absolutely catastrophic. It really represents a quadruple threat to not just the marine ecosystems, but really to planetary health overall. Certainly, as Sean mentioned at the top, it's a threat to marine life. It's a killer of marine life. Secondly, it's going to exacerbate and drive and accelerate extreme weather patterns all over the globe. Thirdly, it's going to contribute to the acceleration of the rise of sea level, and that's going to have consequences certainly in terms of coastal flooding and exacerbating coastal flooding, which we've already been seeing over the past several years. And then fourthly, it's going to slow down the ocean's ability to absorb greenhouse gases. So this small increase, absolutely significant, has that quadruple dangerous impact on not just marine ecosystems, but really planetary systems complete worldwide.
So, Michael, we see the impact of this on things like fish populations, and as Sean pointed out, the movement of fish around the world, as well as you pointed out, what is happening on the coastlines. But will that also affect our climate?
Absolutely. The warming seas, again, it will slow the ability of the oceans to absorb greenhouse gases. That will indeed exacerbate the unfolding climate crisis that we're experiencing and contribute to increased, faster, accelerated global warming. So this is an absolute problem that we're in, and it really underscores the need to begin much more aggressive efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce carbon pollution, as it were, to get real tough regulations on large major emitters, whether they be from oil and gas and other sectors, as well as accelerate the build out of the solution set, renewable energy, clean, green energy, that's going to help solve this climate crisis that we're in the midst of.
Yixing Xu, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. The World Meteorological Organization says that global sea levels are rising at more than double the pace they did in the first decade when measurements started. That's from 1993 to 2002. Here is the organization's Secretary General, Petteri Talas. Let's listen.
We have doubled the sea level rise during the past 20 years. We used to have 2.3 millimeters per year sea level rise 20 years ago, and recently we have seen 4.6 millimeters per year increases. And that increase is very much coming from the melting of major glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica. We have already lost this melting of glaciers game and sea level rise game, so that's bad news.
So, Yixing Xu, scientists at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization are saying that stronger El Nino weather patterns may speed up irreversible melting of ice shelves and ice sheets in Antarctica, and of course that'll mean that we'll see ocean levels rise. I mean, how high could it get?
Yeah, it is certain that the sea levels will continue to rise, but sometimes it's difficult to predict how much and how fast it could rise. So scientists have tried really hard to use all types of models to understand it, and those models work very well most of the time, but sometimes we're still surprised. For example, this recent rapid sea surface temperature rise is a great example. So it is really urgent for scientists to figure out why the sea temperature rises so much and so fast recently, and to understand it, whether this is just an isolated extreme high or the start of an even more worrying trend. And the impact on coastal communities could be significant. It increases risks of coastal flooding, mass mortality of sea lives, and this is particularly damaging for coral reefs, and it could hurt a fishery quite a lot. And there will be more extreme weather events, more intense and long-lasting hurricanes, which could damage the infrastructures of the coastal communities.
Sean, on this question of the rise in ocean levels, I mean, you've been covering this, as I said, for a long time, for decades, really. What have you been seeing? How has it been changing?
Well, it's interesting because I went to Greenland 11 years ago, and I've seen pictures of Russell Glacier, one of the glaciers that they've been following for such a long time, and I don't even recognize it now. It has retreated that much. And Greenland is such a unique case. The pictures just don't do it justice. When you go there, the ice sheet just jumps so high into the, it's pushed up by the mountains and the ice, and you fly to the top with a helicopter. But now, where the ground meets the ice, there's a problem. For years, researchers have thought when ocean water goes under, it only goes under meters, maybe back 100 meters, as long as a football pitch, something like that.
Yeah.
Well, now they've determined it could go back miles, several kilometers back up in there. So it's much more devastating than they first thought. So much of the world's fresh water is stored in the Greenland ice sheet. If that starts to melt, it's going to have a significant effect. And as we talked about, I can't stress these weather patterns that bring such devastating weather, how much this is affected by warming seas. They're just tied hand in hand, and how our political leaders don't see that in the United States and why people don't see a sense of urgency, it does cause me some concern. We've talked a lot about El Nino and La Nina. So La Nina is usually associated with cooler temperatures. We've been in a La Nina the past 8 years. The probes, the satellites, the floats that they monitor are showing a change right now going into El Nino. So if you think you had warm weather and bad conditions the last 8 years, and look what happened with the fires, the flooding, the hurricanes, the tornadoes. We had tornadoes in March in the United States, unheard of. It has the potential to have such a long-lasting effect. And we also talked about the Arctic. It is warming up twice as fast as any place on Earth. And the Arctic, the polar regions, Greenland, they're called the world's air conditioner. If the Amazon basin are the world's lungs, that's the air conditioner. So they're having bits of carbon that drop on there.
Yeah.
So instead of reflecting the sun, it's now absorbing it. So it's causing a lot more melting up there than before. So as we talked about, just a small increment, a small little change could just have catastrophic events worldwide.
That trip that you made to Greenland, I just want to stay with that for a little bit. You were talking about the glaciers there. There is a glacier called the Petermann Glacier, which is in northwest Greenland. Now that is melting very rapidly.
And it's way up there. I mean, we were above the Arctic Circle, and we still had so far to go to get up to where the Petermann Glacier is. And that's the problem. This fresh water just pours out of there like a river. When we went up there, the ice sheet itself, the cover of the ice sheet, 98% of it was showing melting. So if we're really talking about the kind of warmth that the world is experiencing, we could have that again, and rivers of fresh water just pour in, and the effects of that just are exponential.
Changhua Wu, looking at the impact of all of this on food production, crop production, extreme rainfall has cut China's yields of rice by 8% over the last 2 decades. And scientists are saying that the impact of heavy rainfall is the same as the impact of intense heat, and that rice yields could continue to fall. What effect will this have?
We're already feeling that impact. If you look at, particularly using China as an example, if you look at the food security, which is already high up, among the top national agenda there, because with all the, changes, uncertainties there, intensified climate change, particularly the extreme weather events, either flooding, flash flooding, or droughts, extreme heat, whatever. And so the damage to crops, actually, agriculture in China has already been, evidenced and demonstrated already. That's why the government, in response to food security, really started to re-examine the national policy about arable land and about food security. One issue in that picture, I think China is one of the countries actually representing this trend, how to balance actually the food security with continued demand actually for ecosystem conservation. How do we make sure trees will keep standing there, grassland will be protected, and other ecosystems protected? So on one side, we have stronger climate resilience capability. In the meantime, we need to make sure, food agriculture systems are also being well developed to maintain at least the food security in order to feed about 20% of the population on this planet.
So, Changhua, we're talking about the effect of climate change on food production, but what about the amount of arable land that we have right now? I mean, how would that be affected by rising ocean levels?
Well, if just look at the coastal areas there. So if you look at along the coastal areas, of course, arable land also being part of the coastal areas there as well. So sea level rise is definitely impact, in terms of how do we make sure we have enough a big enough arable land to produce the food, in the agriculture system. But we're talking, the impact is much bigger than that. It's not just the coastal areas, actually. It's about the whole water cycles there, right? And either some regions we have, too much water, some other regions actually too little water, plus the conventional problem of too dirty water. So add up together, they're already damaging the food agriculture system around the world. And China definitely is one of the countries that I understand a little bit more.
Michael, if we look at 2022, it was the 5th warmest year on record globally. And we understand that the return of El Nino could drive temperatures up even higher in 2023. Here is Samantha Burgess. She's with the Copernicus Climate Change Service, and she's talking specifically about Europe here. Let's watch.
2022 was the second warmest year on record, the warmest summer on record. We saw prolonged and extensive heat waves and also prolonged and extensive drought over much of the continent. We had the highest emissions of carbon from wildfires in a number of countries, and those wildfires were bigger than average. They started earlier than average, and the season persisted longer than average.
So, Michael, though we're hearing about drought, we're hearing about wildfires, how's that going to impact us?
Well, look, as was just mentioned, the reality is that we've seen increased warming. Indeed, over the past just 15 years, the Earth has accumulated almost as much heat as it did in the past almost half century. And the majority of that energy has actually gone into the oceans, and hence why we're seeing this warming of oceans. This is actually why at Arizona State we've just stood up the School of Ocean Futures here to really begin to study and tackle and advance solutions for this problem. Hired just more than a dozen faculty in the past year to work on this with campuses in the Caribbean and Bermuda, as also in Hawaii. So this is an opportunity for us to advance our knowledge and provide the solution set to get out ahead of this problem. It's something that we've got to actually rapidly tackle because this is a fast-moving problem, and we've got to get out ahead of it. We've got the solutions to do so. We've got to reduce emissions. We've got to get constraints and regulations on those major emitters, and particularly in oil and gas. We've got to increase the amount of renewable energy we can put into generating, electricity and power.
Yixing, COP28 takes place this year, and the United Arab Emirates, which is where the conference is going to take place, said on Tuesday that the world is not ready to switch off fossil fuels. Instead, it said countries should be ready to phase out fuel emissions, not the production of oil, gas, and coal. So there is a division there on how to combat climate change. Some countries, like the United States, want to continue drilling for oil. Others want to phase out fuel emissions. Where is this going? Is there a compromise somewhere there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the journey to net zero carbon emission could take us roughly 30 to 40 years globally. So the whole economy needs to be decarbonized with a fast speed and large scale. And for sectors like electricity, building, and transportation, we should focus on replacing fossil fuel with clean energies. But for hard-to-abate sectors like manufacturing, we do not have matured clean technologies yet to replace fossil fuel. However, we need to develop them now, so that for now, we may still need to rely on fossil fuel to keep the economy running. That's necessary, but we need to develop the technologies to capture carbon and store carbon to ensure that we can achieve net zero in the future. And I think instead of choosing between replacing fossil fuel and phasing out fuel emission, we really need to do both. Deploying clean energy to replace fossil fuel and developing carbon capture and storage technologies in case we still need small amount of fossil fuel in certain industries in the future. So I think both categories of technology are necessary to help us achieve net zero in the future.
Sean, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, he's been talking about the urgency of combating climate change. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
You are the major economies, but also the major emitters. And our world has a major climate challenge before us. Today's policies would make our world 2.8 degrees hotter by the end of the century. And this is a death sentence. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has made clear that it is still possible to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, but only if the world takes a quantum leap in climate action, and that depends on you. We need global acceleration through cooperation. And that means rising above disagreements, differences, and tensions. Geopolitical divisions must not torpedo the world's climate fight for 1.5 degrees.
So we heard the Secretary General there, Sean, talking about geopolitical divisions, and we know what that looks like these days.
Yeah.
So getting back to the point you made right at the beginning of the program on politicians needing to act and act now, is there the political will, do you sense, for something to take place?
Globally, the will's there. In the United States, I don't see it happening. It's just too politically divided, and it's incredibly frustrating to see. In eastern Kentucky last year, they had hideous floods, not something they'd never seen before. Well, the senator from Kentucky is Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. The chance of getting any kind of legislation that could go to combat climate change is simply not there. You hear so many people, so many conservatives in the United States taking shots at renewable energy, such as the blades for wind power or lithium batteries, from the mining of lithium to the construction of the batteries. People saying, well, we need fossil fuels to do that. I admit it's problematic right now, but it's moving in the right direction. And the right answer is not fossil fuels under any way, shape, or form. I'm someone who grew up in West Virginia. My grandfather was a coal miner. So many of my other friends work in the coal, steel, and rail industries in that area, but its time is gone. If you're going to have significant change, think about the nations that approved the Paris Accord. Only 2 nations at the time abstained. One, Nicaragua, because it didn't go far enough. So everybody is in agreement on this. But the United States, one of the chief polluters and clearly the leader in terms of purchasing and acquisitions, there's all kinds of trouble. And the United States needs to step up, needs to be the world leader, and it's just not doing it.
Michael Dorsey, very quickly, I've only got about 40 seconds. What did you make of that warning from Antonio Guterres, especially his very pointed reference to the level in the rise in temperature? You know, we're looking at what the target is 1.5, but he said it could be 2.8.
Hope is on the horizon on it. You know, I have to say that certainly Kentucky is last in terms of solar and wind, but the reality is it's not at zero. 78 megawatts installed in that state. Lots of things that can be done. And that's similar, I think, across the world. There's tremendous opportunity to deliver the solutions at scale in places that we think are behind. They can actually surge forward. And there's an effort to do that, and money is moving to help them do so.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thank you for watching.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global business, only on CGTN.